Every house has its own voice. We get used to it. We call it drafts, the creak of old floorboards, the foundation settling. These are the sounds we have learned to ignore. This is noise. But what if a sound stops being just noise? What if it acquires a rhythm, a logic, an intent? When a quiet tap from under the floor becomes not just a sound but a code, and a whisper from an empty room becomes an invitation to a game whose rules you do not know. The most terrifying moment is not the sound itself. It's the moment you realize you are not imagining it. That's when you understand the house isn't just speaking, it's replying. Or even worse, it's asking questions.
They say every old house has its own sounds, its own language. The creak of floorboards, the hum of pipes, the tap of branches on the window. I used to think so too until I moved into this house. Now I know that sometimes a house doesn't just speak. Sometimes it hides something. My name is Henry. I first heard the sound in my second week after moving in. It was night. Around 2 in the morning. I woke up to a strange, low scraping sound coming from directly beneath my bed. It wasn't a rat. The sound was too measured, too slow. I froze, listening. It lasted for about a minute, and then it fell silent. My heart was pounding. I turned on the light, leaned over, and looked under the bed. Nothing. Just old wooden floors and dust. The boards must be warping, I told myself, trying to calm down. I went back to sleep, but a feeling of anxiety lingered.
The sound returned every night, always at the same time, and it turned my anxiety into fear. Every night, between 2 and 3, this slow, methodical scraping would begin. It didn't get louder, it didn't change, it was a routine. And it was this routine that was driving me mad. If it were just the house, the sounds would be chaotic, dependent on the weather, but this felt like a ritual. I started sleeping poorly, constantly listening. I tried to find the source. I knocked on every floorboard. I checked the foundation. Everything was solid. I told my friend about it. He laughed. "Henry," he said, "you just moved into an old house and you're not used to it yet. Get yourself some earplugs." I felt like an idiot. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was just psyching myself out and it really was just old wood. I decided to put a camera under my bed to prove to myself that I was going crazy. I took an old phone, started a video recording, and placed it under the bed, aiming it at the part of the floor where I thought the sound was coming from. I stayed up all night, waiting. The sound began, as usual, and lasted for its typical minute. In the morning, with trembling hands, I retrieved the phone and started reviewing the footage. There was darkness, the night shadows, nothing. And in the exact minute that I had clearly heard the scraping, the recording had only silence. But I saw something else. One of the floorboards, dark and old, was moving ever so slightly, a millimeter up and down, in perfect time with the sound I heard, but that wasn't on the recording. It was as if it was breathing. I understood. That wasn't a board. That was a lid.
The discovery under the floorboard was the beginning of the real nightmare. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I took a crowbar and with incredible effort pried up that same breathing board. It gave way. Underneath was not earth, but a small dark cavity. I shone my flashlight inside. In the recess, on a piece of old yellowed fabric, lay a small wooden box. I pulled it out. It was old, with no lock. I opened it. Inside was a single item, an old cassette tape. On it, in shaky handwriting, was written, "Don't listen to this, please." I sat on the floor holding this cassette. I realized that the scraping wasn't coming from inside the box. It was someone or something trying to get to this box from the outside, from under the house.
Last night, I couldn't take it anymore. I found an old cassette player. I sat in the silence, looking at the tape. Don't listen to this. Maybe it was a warning? Or maybe it was exactly what the thing that was scraping didn't want me to hear. I put the cassette in and pressed play. At first, there was only hiss. And then I heard it. A quiet child's voice, crying. And then another voice, an adult's, soothing it. And then, suddenly the sound changed. I heard that same familiar scrape, but this time it was loud, frantic, and it was on the tape. And then, from under my bed, in the real world, a new sound came. Not scraping, but a quiet, clear knock on the floor from below. As if the thing that had been trying to break through had now heard me and was just asking to be let in. I don't know who is on this tape, and I don't know who is knocking from below, and I don't know which of them is more dangerous.
We all leave traces, fingerprints, forgotten items. But what if someone started leaving traces that were impossible to explain? Traces that prove the walls of your home are not as solid as you think. My name is Nathan, and my story began with a simple, foggy window. I saw the first message in the morning after a shower. I live on the 12th floor. When I got out of the bathroom, the mirror and the bedroom window were completely fogged up. And on the glass of the window, among the condensation drops, I saw a message. It was a single word as if written by a finger. Hello. I froze. I live alone. No one could have done this. Maybe it was just a random pattern, a trick of the moisture. I got closer. The lines were too clean, too even. It was definitely writing. I wiped it away with my hand, but the feeling of unease remained. I checked the window, it was securely locked. I checked the door, locked. It must be an old message that reappeared with the steam, I told myself. It was the only logical explanation. When the messages started appearing without any steam, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. A few days later, I came home. The windows were dry and clean. I tossed my keys on the table, and when I turned around, I saw a new message on the same window. It had appeared as if from nowhere, on completely dry glass. This time, it was a question. Are you alone? The writing looked like a greasy fingerprint, but when I touched it, the glass was perfectly clean. There was no grease, no moisture. The mark was as if it were inside the glass. I started to panic. This could no longer be explained logically. I searched the entire apartment. No one. I called my landlord. He said no one could have entered and that I was probably just overworked. Again. I had become a prisoner in my own apartment where someone invisible was leaving me messages, using my windows as their personal diary.
The flower experiment was the proof that I wasn't going crazy. I decided to conduct an experiment. I'd heard about this method in movies. I sprinkled a thin, barely visible layer of flour on the floor in front of that same window. If anyone approached it, they would leave footprints. I went to bed, though my sleep was fitful. In the morning, I woke up and immediately rushed to the window. My heart was pounding. On the window was a new message. I know you're watching. I looked down at the floor. The flower was completely untouched. Not a single footprint, not a single mark, nothing. I stood there, looking at this perfectly smooth layer of flour and then at the message, and a terror so profound washed over me that I nearly collapsed. It doesn't walk on the floor. It doesn't approach the window. It's possibly already outside it. Or, even worse, it never came in at all. It was always here.
The dialogue through the glass was the moment of my biggest mistake. Driven to desperation, I decided to reply. I took a dry erase marker, and under the new message, "Are you afraid of me?" I wrote, "Yes. Who are you?" I sat and watched the window, waiting. Nothing happened. I felt foolish. An hour later, when I had almost forgotten about it, I saw new letters slowly appearing on the glass, as if developing. It wrote, "Your neighbor." I live on the 12th floor. I don't have neighbors outside this window, only air. I looked down at the street, and then at the window in the building across from mine. It was dark.
I read the last message from the street. After it wrote, "Your neighbor," I couldn't take it anymore. I ran out of the apartment, down the stairs, and out onto the street. I needed air. I stood and looked up at the window of my bedroom on the 12th floor. It was lit. I saw a new message appearing on it, in large letters. I couldn't make it out. I took out my phone, turned on the camera, and zoomed in as far as I could, and I read it. The message was, "No, not that one. Look down." I lowered my phone and looked at the windows of the building across the street. In the window that was directly opposite mine, a light suddenly turned on. I saw the dark silhouette of a person standing there, looking directly at me. And then they raised a hand and slowly, very slowly, waved at me. I don't know who it is, but I know they weren't writing on my window. They were writing on theirs, backwards. And they are still there, waiting for me to come home. We've all heard strange sounds at night. But what if those sounds aren't just noise? What if it's a game? A game being played with you by someone you can't see, with rules you don't know. My name is Will, and someone lives in my apartment who loves to play hide and seek. They never lose. The first sound I heard was simple. One evening, I was sitting in the living room. My roommate had moved out a week ago, and I was finally enjoying the quiet. Suddenly, from his empty room came a soft but clear sound, as if something small, like a coin, had been dropped on the wooden floor. I froze. Maybe something fell off a shelf? I got up and opened the door. The room was completely empty. Dan had taken all his things. There was nothing on the floor. Strange, I thought. I closed the door and went back to what I was doing. That was just the beginning. It was just checking if I was listening.
The game began when the sounds started responding to my actions. The next time, it was the creak of a closet door. I went to check again. As soon as I approached the door of the empty room, the sound stopped. I went back to the couch. A minute later, the creaking resumed. This repeated several times, and I understood. It was a game. It knew when I was coming. It was reacting to my presence. I decided to test it. I stood up and took a few steps toward the room, then stopped abruptly. And the sound stopped too. It was like the children's game Red Light, Green Light. When I moved, it froze. When I was still, it moved. It wasn't scary. It was creepy. There was someone invisible and playful in my home, and I had become its playmate against my will. I began to fear the silence because I knew it meant it was waiting for my next move. The rules of the game became more complex when it started using my things. One morning I woke up and couldn't find my car keys. I searched the whole apartment. They were nowhere. Annoyed, I was about to call a taxi when my gaze fell on the door to the empty room. It was slightly ajar. I went over and peeked inside. In the middle of the completely empty room, on the floor, lay my keys. This was a new level of the game. Now it wasn't just making sounds. It was taking my things and moving them into its territory, as if luring me inside. The next day, it was my book. Then, the TV remote. I started to feel not like the owner of the apartment, but like a lab technician who has to enter a cage with an invisible beast to retrieve his things.
I decided to barricade the door, and that was my mistake. I was tired of this game. One evening, I took a heavy dresser and pushed it against the door of the empty room, blocking it completely. "Game over," I said out loud. The apartment was perfectly silent all night. I felt like a winner. In the morning, I woke up to a strange feeling of cold. I opened my eyes and saw my blanket was on the floor. I got up. All the doors of my wardrobe were open. All the drawers were pulled out. In the kitchen, all the dishes had been taken out of the cupboards and placed on the table. My personal space, my bedroom, my kitchen, had been turned upside down. But nothing was broken. Everything was done very neatly. I understood. I had locked it out of its room, so now it had decided my entire apartment was its playground.
Last night, I put everything back in its place. I moved the dresser away from the door. I can't beat it. I can only play by its rules. I now live in a constant game. I leave my things out in the open, and in the morning, I find them in its room. Sometimes when I come back, I find little gifts on my pillow. An old button, a small stone, a candy wrapper. It's its way of communicating. We don't see each other. We don't talk. We just play this quiet, endless game. And I don't know who it is. Maybe it's the ghost of a child who once lived here. Or maybe I've just finally lost my mind. But the scariest part is, sometimes when I find my thing in its room, I don't feel fear, but a strange, twisted sense of comfort, as if I'm no longer alone. And I'm afraid of the day I won't want this game to end.